Hello everyone, welcome to How I Hacked Your Bank Account. And when I say bank account and when I say hacked, I mean how I hacked as in how I stole money from your bank account over UPI. I'm Nemo, I'm an open source developer. I'm a hacker and a maker, a mix of both. I was a founding engineer at Razorpay where I dealt with security, DevOps, compliance, wore a lot of different hats. I was accidentally also a speaker at Nullcon 2014 talking about browser extension security long ago. These days, I run a project of mine called endoflife.date, which some of you may have used. It does supply chain stuff. It's an open source project. Please do look at it. Just a few clarifications. Did I actually hack your bank account? No, it's just for the title. Could I have done it? Yes. What would I have needed to actually hack your bank account? Just your mobile number. And given these days how ubiquitous mobile numbers are, I'm assuming mine is already in like 30 different public databases, and so it's probably yours. I did not unfortunately make any money from this. I did not actually steal money. I was working at Razorpay at the time, and this research was done mostly in my free time with a lot of help from Razorpay. So you probably already know what UPI is. It's a retail instant mobile payment system. I'm sure all of you here who have an Indian bank account have already used it. The numbers are huge. It powers 10 billion transactions in August this year. It powers 81% of all digital transactions in India. These are really, really huge numbers. Unfortunately, for these huge numbers, there's not been enough security research done on it, and that's one of the points of my talk. There's only been one previous paper published on UPI in 2020, and this is, I think, the second one since. A critical component of UPI is the interoperability. If you have a mobile number, these mobile numbers are mapped to your bank account. So there was an RBI regulation which forced you to link up your mobile, give your mobile numbers to your bank accounts. And using these, using this mobile number to bank account mappings, UPI interoperates along the app layer as well as the bank account layer, depending on no matter which mobile number you have, which is to say which SIM you have, or which app you bring. You can bring WhatsApp, you can bring PhonePay, you can bring Bheem, and many, many others more. Whichever bank account you might have. You can mix and match all of these combinations and still use UPI, which makes it the truly interoperable network, which is to say I could use UPI with my PNB account using an HDFC app or vice versa. This unfortunately also becomes a critical weak point, as we'll see later. But it's retail, it's meant for consumers, it's instant, which is a very, when you do payments in general, while let's say credit cards, they look like instant payments to us, but they're settled in a period of like 3 to 5 days. Very often when you do get refunds back, they also, again, take a time of 5 to 7 days. UPI is instant, and this makes, it also has a very hard chance of reversibility because these are bank transfers, these are not credit card transactions. Because these are bank transfers, they're considered mostly final, which is to say reversing a UPI transaction is really, really difficult, which also makes it a very good point for scammers in the industry. If you want to scam someone of money, and you want to hack somebody's bank account, UPI is probably a preferred choice because getting back money from a UPI transaction is much harder because it's a bank transfer. You have to put up your PIN. So to understand the actual vulnerability and what I hacked and how I hacked your bank account, we'll need to go through and understand a bit of UPI and how it works. We'll go backwards. We want to steal money from somebody's account, so we want to get it somewhere. So we'll start from the destination. This is what we'll call the payee account. These days, accounts are essentially ledgers. They're all Excel spreadsheets somewhere maintained in a database. And for that to work, there's essentially a bank account number and associated bank balance. What we want to do is increase that bank balance number. In order to do that, we need to trigger a notification from another system, which is the bank that transfers the money. In this case, your bank account. The first one is mine. And I want to trigger a notification that says, please increase my bank account balance, which is to say a transaction notification from one of the CBS systems. CBS here stands for centralized bank systems. These are essentially the main ledger systems of banks. And I want to transfer money from yours to mine. These internally link backwards to what I'm going to call UPI backend throughout the talk. This is the system that integrates with the CBS to actually interoperate with your app. All of this is hidden away system. These are sitting, let's say, in bank data centers somewhere. We don't have direct access to any of these systems. So, for example, which means the UPI backend over here is considered kind of in the trusted domain within the CBS system here. Both of those are run maybe by different entities, sometimes by same, we'll see. And finally, we have the app. This app may be very, very different apps. UPI apps essentially have two components. They are a mix of what is called the NPCI common library, which is what does some of the crypto and some of the pin pads that you see on your application, which tells you where to type the pin code. You might have noticed it's the same across all of these apps. That's what comes from the CL. And the other part of the app is the regular app stuff. PhonePe has its own way of showing you the list of transactions. You can filter them. WhatsApp will have its own, and so on. That's what's completely determined by the app. An important point to note that the transfer of data from the app to the UPI backend is completely determined by the app maker, or rather the partnership which might happen between these two entities. So, for example, if we have on the left we have PhonePe app, it might be talking to a Yes Bank backend, maybe PhonePe backend, we don't know. The HDFC app might decide to talk to the HDFC backend. The Beam app, which is the cross-platform neutral-ish NPCI-driven app, talks to the NPCI backend. Why is it important to see? The application itself is talking to a specific backend, but it may not necessarily be your own bank. So, for example, when I use PhonePe, it may talk to a Yes Bank backend, but I may be using it with my PNB bank account. And finally, there's also a database associated with the UPI backend that you have. This will hold typically your transaction history just for that given app. This is just a small lens into your actual CBS system, right? When you go to your net banking website, or when you print out a passbook, that'll have all of your transactions. If you made some of those transactions via PhonePe, some of them via WhatsApp, these different apps will just have that specific subset, and they will keep that data set with them. They do not have access to your complete data, but they do have access to whatever transactions they have powered, whether it be requests or transactions that have been made forward or transactions you have received. All right. The second thing I want to note is the trust boundary. Everything on the UPI backend side or the NPCI side, except for the application itself, is considered somewhat in the trusted domain, which it rightly is. All of these are systems that are internal to the bank. Even though we are interacting with them via what we call the UPI backend, all of those, any requests that they make forward within themselves are considered in the trusted domain. And a good example of that is a bank account lookup. When you do a bank account lookup, when you authenticate to a UPI app, you pick your bank account, and then it returns back a list of bank account numbers that may be associated with that. That doesn't require any authentication as long as you make that request from the trusted domain. If the UPI backend of, let's say, WhatsApp decides to make a request to PNB and say, hey, this is the phone number, and it gives out my phone number and says, hey, do you have an associate bank account with it? Then my bank will return back with a correct response without me having ever opened an app. It doesn't actually need my request because these are all trusted requests. Similar is the case for VPA lookups, which has been exploited previously. You can use VPA lookups to get access to somebody's full name, just given their phone number, for example. So the thing that we want to hack is the auth flow. We want to spoof, and I want to spoof your phone number so that I can get access to your bank account. This is how auth flow typically works in UPI apps. You have the setup happening, which is where the application makes. The left side is the app, the rightmost is the UPI backend, where the app triggers a setup request to the backend and says, hey, you know what, I want to start with the registration process. The backend replies back with an SMS token. This is typically a randomly generated token. It sends it along with, or maybe it's a hard-coded mobile number, where they want you to deliver that SMS. And the reason they want you to do it is because they want to validate whether you own this mobile number or not. Previously in the past, it was possible to do this via OTPs that you might have received. It has been changed a long time ago to only allow forward sending SMSs as proof of authentication of the ownership of that mobile number. So now you go ahead and you send that SMS. In Android, it happens automatically. In iOS, you need to click a button to do it. But when you send that SMS goes to the ISP, which has a partnership with the bank. They get that SMS forward along with the mobile number associated with it. Then they use this mobile number and they say, hey, you know what, your profile now has been verified. I now know this mobile number. We are all good. The app keeps long polling and says, am I verified yet? Have you got my SMS yet? And it keeps doing that till it sounds good. And finally, it does an additional step where it registers the keys with NPCI. So when you type along the pins on your device, those are all encrypted using a specific key. Those keys are passed along to NPCI using what is called the device registration process. This is not very relevant to this talk, but I wanted to mention it because if you want to look into it. So this is the gist of that slide. What all data lives where in UPI? Your mobile number typically lives within both the app, the UPI backend, as well as the NPCI side. The keys, which are the signing keys and encryption keys used to encrypt your PIN numbers and your OTPs, are kept on the app side as well as shared across to NPCI. The authentication token, which decides the auth flow between you and the backend. It may be GWT, it may be a cookie, it may be a header, whatever. It's entirely dependent on the app. Those are shared between the app and the backend. The device ID, you have it, NPCI has it, the backend may or may not have it. Finally, any additional data, the databases that we saw earlier, just for those apps, they may have your profile information. For example, they may ask you to give your email, they may ask you to give your date of birth, etc. They may ask you for security questions. And additionally, your transaction history, just for that specific app. This is what the general data storage looks like within UPI. One important thing you'll notice is what I've highlighted in red is the mobile part. Mobile number does live in 3 different places. And if these, it's essentially a shared state problem. All of those 3 want to make sure that they have the same mobile number, but they may or may not. Depends on how you validated, where you validated. And now there are 3 independent parties involved. My app, the UPI backend, NPCI, and in some cases, the telco provider may also be involved. So there are lots of different ways you can try to spoof around this. There's also device ID, which is essentially an identifier you can just generate and make up on your device. Thankfully, it's not trusted. It's used for fingerprinting, etc. But it is also a easily spoofed thing. The remaining things are pretty much random and generated, so we won't look into it. You might also notice keys as being shared by NPCI. I'll get to that later. So I want to get to the vulnerability. And I'll be honest, this is a very basic, simple vulnerability. It wasn't a big hack. However, the impact compared to those are enough effort involved in it. But when you do get to the impact of it, it ends up becoming huge because I could hack your bank account. And the reason this vulnerability exists is it trusts the client to make up a mobile number. When you open the Indian Overseas Bank app, this was on the Android app, it will ask you to do a first-time setup, or it will ask you to log in. And in order to do that, you type your mobile number, you type your date of birth, it'll ask you for a few security questions, and it creates your profile on the database backend. And then it sends you back an SMS token and says, please send that SMS to us. And then you go ahead and you send that SMS. And then you keep the long polling stuff. Everything else remains the same. But one important thing, they never actually validate that SMS. All that happens is they receive that SMS at their end, and they inform the app, hey, I've gotten the SMS, please proceed. All it took for me to actually create a profile with your mobile number was to skip the app, a few steps in the app. I was using FIDA, I was using objection. There was a lot of hard work involved in actually setting up the framework to get this hack working. But once you figure out that you can just skip out a checkout activity from one activity to the other on Android, it's fairly simple. So the application itself on the backend was not checking whether the mobile number in the profile database matched the mobile number that the ISP gave. When both of these were different, it didn't care. It just said, hey, I've gotten the SMS, and let's proceed. The other part is the mobile number gets forwarded from the UPI backend again to the NPCI side, and that's once again in the trusted boundaries, so we don't really care about it because whatever mobile number was in the database, which happens to be yours, gets forwarded across to NPCI, and we're all good. So as a result, without sending a single SMS, with just spoofing a few requests, I've managed to sign up as you on a banking application, right? What does it let me do? The impact depends on whether you're an existing customer of the IOB UPI, Bheem UPI app, which not many people are. It's not a well-known app. Maybe I think it had 2 or 3 reviews when I tried it up. If depends on if you're a user, it will already have a transaction history, which I'll immediately get access to. It also gave me access to your bank account numbers. If you're a new user, which the majority of you might have been, it would just let me sign up and look up your bank account numbers. It will let me pick a specific bank and check whether you have a bank account with it or not. But in order to actually withdraw money from it, I still need to go one step further. I need to guess your PIN. Guessing PINs depends on 2 different ways. Whether I want to do a targeted attack on a specific person, in which case I'll try to fish out the PIN. I'll try to brute force it over time. There's not necessarily rate limits across all these banks, so it's possible to actually brute force PINs given long enough time. PINs in UPI can either be 4-digit or 6-digit. And 4 digits, to be very honest, which is what very large banks in India do use, is not a really large key space when you just skipped out the first authentication entirely. And given that this is essentially a zero-click attack, I don't need your involvement at all. It could be delivered on a population scale. I could just take over a malicious, I could just run the script across multiple different IPs, across thousands and thousands of phone numbers, and just guess maybe 3 pins each, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0. And out of millions and millions of phone numbers, maybe 10,000 people might have those pins. And suddenly I have managed a way to make money. So coming back to why was this missed, it seems like a fairly obvious check, right? These are banking grade apps. They're supposed to have banking grade encryption. They are supposed to have been pen tested. CERT and panel auditors are supposed to check these apps. And all of that happened. But this was still missed. And I have two hypotheses of thoughts for why this happens. The first is that these apps are highly obfuscated, right? In order to get to a place where I was able to look at the requests, look at the responses, spoof the requests and spoof the responses, I had to spend a terrible amount of time breaking out these defenses one by one. I had to strip out the SSL penning. I had to evade multiple levels of root detections. After I had done those, they had field level encryption, which I had to figure out how they were doing. I had to crack out the encryption keys for those, figure out how the encryption was working. Even after that, it took me a while to figure out, hey, I could skip this entire step and my profile was still valid. And when you give an app to a pen tester to say, hey, this is an app, please pen test it, they are often on a deadline. They do not have the time to jump through all of these hurdles and still get to a stage where these apps would be safe and secure. And that's my hypothesis for why this was easily missed. It would have been a much, much easier fix and much more easily caught if all of these obfuscation mechanisms were not present for the apps that were pen tested. So I'll get to suggestions in a bit. So this is what the problems with UPI end up looking. The first is decentralizers. So not all banks in India are working with millions of customers. They don't have the capability or the infrastructure to deal with customers at a population scale, right? If I go to Indian overseas banks, their security team maybe have 2, 3, 5 people, and there are much, much smaller banks also with UPI apps in the market. Unfortunately, UPI has this thing because of its decentralized nature. I don't need to hack HDFC Bank to hack HDFC's bank account. I just need to hack some random bank apps to hack your bank account, which makes it vastly different. UPI delegates auth to the app. The authentication mechanism being delegated is entirely left to whichever small third-party contractor for some small bank has written it up. I don't need to hack the hardest possible bank. I need to hack the easiest possible app, right? And there are dozens and dozens of apps in the App Store and Play Store. You just need to pick one and find one. The second problem is it believes that all devices are trusted to a high degree. All apps are trusted to a high degree. So a hypothetical scenario would be you take a app, make a clone out of it, change out the pin pad, keep the SMS sending notification hidden, and you're left with change out the app entirely. Maybe make it a lottery app, maybe make it a flashlight app, maybe make an app that hides away your private documents, and people will end up typing their pins on it. Give them 3 attempts, and suddenly if you have a large enough app with a large enough user base, you could pull off an attack which gets you enough money. The third problem is UPI believes in obfuscation a lot. For example, the UPI common library stores these keys in a database called contacts.sqlite. These are critical signing keys, encryption keys, but they're obfuscated away and they're not really documented well enough. An example for that is, you remember how the keys I mentioned were shared across to NPCI? NPCI gets access to your PIN via that, and then they re-encrypt those with the bank, and then they forward it to the bank. But as a result, UPI pins are not end-to-end encrypted. This was an initial target goal when UPI was created, but it has never been met because it's really hard to deploy these systems in production. As a result, your PIN ends up being shared by NPCI, which then re-encrypts it and shares it to their bank. This is kind of a bad thing. We're okay with it, but there's not enough people talking about it because there's not enough research. The standards are not public anymore. UPI 1.0 had some of its protocols and specs published, but since then, as we have added more and more layers to it, they haven't been. So where's the scope for improvement? There are 3 things. First is obviously we need to have open security standards for UPI. We need to be able to say, hey, as UPI complexity grows, as it takes over now 81% and climbing percentage of a digital payments ecosystem, we should have standards that clearly say, hey, this is the security impact of what we are building, and these are well-vetted, audited by security professionals. These should be regularly updated. Currently, NPCI is the sole regulatory arbiter in what ends up getting deployed on these systems. They set out circulars to decide what the level of security should be in these systems, and that may or may not be enough. We need better pen tests, and what I mean by better pen tests is pen testers should have the ability to work on apps that are not necessarily hurdled. It's like if I'm running a hurdle race, and I want to run it to the best of my ability, it's easier if the hurdles were removed. We know the hurdles are not going to stop a dedicated attacker. You might put in field level encryption, you might put in a third layer of encryption, you might decide to add SSL penning, you might add root detections and so on. But it will not stop a dedicated attacker. So it's much, much better, and this applies to all your companies and all your work as well. Ask your dev team to give you stripped out builds that do not include all of those hurdles for you. If they're giving you builds that have all those hurdles, do test them, validate whether the hurdles are working or not, but then pass that on and say, hey, can you give me a clear app, because that will allow me to work much better as a pen tester. And finally, we need to have a vulnerability disclosure program for UPI, as well as the entire banking ecosystem in general. By companies in India, PhonePe, Razorpay, etc. are running it, it doesn't happen across banks, and that needs to change. And finally, I have a call for hackers. All of you are hackers. There's 100 plus UPI apps in the market across Play Store and App Store. Go hack some of them. I have this open source initiative called Librefin, where I'm trying to build an open source UPI app. It involves reversing what works and re-implementing that. So please check it out. And if you're hacking on UPI apps, help is welcome. If you have any questions, and if you need help with reporting any of the vulnerabilities that you found, I'm happy to help as well. Thank you.